and like applications and so on. All right. Secondly, what we talk about is the alternative in the medical case, right? The alternative here is using factory-made substances that often have side effects, and often these side effects and things like that are ignored due to pressure by the pharmaceutical industry and things like that, right? At a point in time, you convert to more natural substances. The people who are actually involved in the production of these natural substances, their incentives are completely different from the those of pharmaceuticals. I think you get a more healthy environment in which you can actually figure out how these substances might work in the course of therapy and the course of like all of these things, right? Secondly, in terms of recreation, right? Currently, we're also dealing with two different groups, right? We're dealing in terms of recreation. You're dealing with current users who are currently exposed to like a number of substances that are not regulated properly, and as such, they might be extremely harmful because of contamination, because they are engaged in supply chains where where it's essentially being run by like drug lords or whatever. So they might be getting things that are particularly addictive or things that might be contaminated, right? At that point in time, when you convert to more natural substances and you have a more healthy supply chain and things like that, what you get is that for these current users, now you have a significant benefit in terms of less risk of contamination, less risk of addiction and things like that, right? And secondly, we also think that in terms of there is a certain sector of the population which, due to number of social factors, is might be susceptible to drug usage, right? I think at a point in time where you have like a more healthy alternative in terms of hallucinogens, in terms of more diverse experiences, we must prefer it to more harder drugs like cocaine and morphine, which have like very demonstrably harmful effects in the long term, right? Let's actually, and secondly, let's look at what a model where active encouragement looks like, right? It looks like a proper regulation of these substances, right? For example, I want to make this very clear, so please note that this does not mean that these substances would be available over the counter, or that a child could go into a pharmacy and buy this, right? What we would like to do is like for example, a model in which people who like need to go through go through a number of psychological tests and figure out if they are in a state of mind where they can actually consume these substances properly, right? Because that is where addiction arises from, right? Addiction arises from when you're particularly susceptible to depression or things like that, and then you engage in drugs, then you are much more likely to get addicted, right? So what we will have is like for example, like we can have like proper criteria for how who is actually eligible. Secondly, we can also actually at that point regulate dosage, right? Which is very important, right? It's very important because that is a big cause of depression in like addiction, in terms of how these things actually lead to addiction, right? And we have an actual model, right? So if you look at Silicon Valley, if you were on Twitter like a couple of years back, micro dosing LSD and micro dosing mushrooms was a big trend, right? Why? It led to productivity gains and it was sustainable, right? I think a lot of these companies, like a lot of these Silicon Valley tech people, found that it actually cleared up their mind. It allowed them to work like at a better level, and at that point in time, there's significant benefits that have currently gone under examined in society, right? So the main benefit of such regulation or such an approach to these substances would be that it provides a safer space for experimentation, right? Because people will always have that need to experiment with these things. Here you're providing them a safer space, right? And what's the alternative, right? On the alternative, you have this war on drugs. In the status quo, we are persecuting people, which and the war on drugs hasn't exactly gone well. It's led to persecution, led to all of these supply chains shifting to drug lords in Afghanistan, drug lords in South America and stuff like that. I don't think it's actually a recipe for success, right? Because at that point in time, not only are you shifting the control onto people who are not exactly accountable, but like in general, it's not had a lot of harmful effects in terms of incarceration and like over incarceration of minorities, over incarceration of people in general, right? The other main argument is that currently research into these substances is gone unexamined, right? Because due to social norms around hallucinogens, people haven't actually researched, right? And when they started researching, they found a lot of benefits in terms of therapeutics, right? And like benefits in terms of productivity, right? So at a point in time where you have a more positive approach to these substances, you can also better regulate them because now you have more knowledge as to their benefits and what potentially might lead to addiction. And lastly, what we really think as the core of this debate is that individuals should not be regulated for things like this, right? The state should not interfere in an act where an individual is simply consuming a substance. He or she is free to do with his or her body as they wish. They don't need need to consult the state on something that does not cause active harm to other people or does not even cause very long-term addiction to themselves, right? At that point in time, when it's an overreach of the state to assume the control of these substances. I think that is why like a more positive approach to this is not one that's more productive, but also leads to more benefit in terms of like the nature of relationship between the state and the individual. Thank you. I'm very proud to propose.
All right, next we call upon the leader of opposition. Here.
Yeah, give me a minute. For the PI preference, please just write it in the chat box because I'm going to be standby in the chat box. And for my preferred gender pronoun is he, him, please. Check, am I audible?
Yeah, now you are. That's great. Could you repeat your pronouns, please?
Yeah, my preferred gender pronoun is he, him, please.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Before I'm going to my speech as opening opposition, there are several engagements that I would like to do to the Prime Minister cases, right? So number one, they are talking about regulations on these natural substances, ladies and gentlemen. So first of all, they never picture us to you on how the people, for example, on the ground will access these natural substances in the very first place, right? We assume the accessibility of these natural substances is going to be extremely easy simply because you might, for example, find any kind of toxin mushroom in the jungle, for example, and you can finally utilize this because this is something that is mother nature given, right? Because I do not necessarily think that regulations on these natural substances is going to be possible under the sort of house, because people understand no one owns nature, ladies and gentlemen. When you want to access the amount of toxin of mushroom that can make you high as an individual and give you recreational effect, ladies and gentlemen, this is not something that you can regulate. Because of why? Because there are narratives saying that this is a natural substances that is given by the mother nature at the end of the day, right? But second of all, I do not understand on how you are going to regulate on these natural substances, right? These natural substances is going to be substances that you can find, for example, on the jungle, on the forest, right? So I do not necessarily see the mechanization on how are you going to regulate this. Are you going to patrol every single jungle, carrying all this toxin, the toxin that is produced by mushrooms, for example, under surveillance, or how, right? So I don't necessarily think that their feasibility is can be applied under their sort of house. There are two things I'm going to talk about. Number one, I'm going to talk about the framings coming from opening opposition, how our work will look like. This will give you a better picturization as to why manufacturing these substances is going to be better. But number two, I'm going to talk about how under our sort of house, the innovation of drugs, the recreational effect that can be undergone by under our sort of house is going to be much safer in opening opposition, right? So three important framings that I would like to tell you. Number one, look, under our sort of house, obviously we are not going to encourage people to use drugs, but once they use drugs that alter their consciousness, I think that in opposition we are going to promote the usage of non-natural substances, right? But second of all, under our side of the house, our promotion does not come with the reckless decision to access these non-natural substances. This is to say you are going to be attached with certain dosage recommended by the professionals. For example, there are warnings, there are precautions that you are going to inform you, right? The non-natural substances have been undergone certain laboratory tests, ladies and gentlemen, making sure that it is going to be safe for humans. Under their side of the house, they don't know, they don't get a fully informed what these natural substances, whether or not these natural substances that they get is something that is good or bad for them, right? So what are they going to do is that they are going to do the trial and error to find the recreational effect for humans being, which might risk the safety of this human being at the end of the day. Under our side of the house, this is going to be tested in laboratory, right? This laboratory test making it justified to promote this usage because there are certain degree of safety net that we give to people when they would like to maximize the recreational effect of these drugs and so on and so forth, right? And second of all, we think that it is going to be better because of this laboratory test, for example, even if in the worst case scenario, it's something that might be still detrimental for the people, we think that people can still be accountable under our side of the house. Companies can still be accountable under our side of the house because it is accountable as it has passed through certain laboratory retest before you distribute it in the market, right? Look, you are an environmentalist. Promoting things that are not tested and calculated are not right principally under your side of the house, ladies and gentlemen. Not your role. You are an environmentalist at the end of the day, right? Whether or not you want to promote it. Maybe you have the exposure and knowledge and the biodiversity and all, right? But the problem is that you are not a pharmacist. This is not moral for you to promote things that might risk for the people. You cannot operate under the assumption that natural substances are good, because not natural substances are good for the people when they are not in an amount right of dosage, and also if they are, for example, might include certain natural toxic substances that exist under their server house, right? So you cannot operate the benefit under this assumption. But last but not least, right, let's talk about the accessibility. Obviously, if you want to access this, there are going to be prescription, ladies and gentlemen, from the medical professionals, right? There are limitations of access. There are limitations of access under outside of the house that make sure that people are not always irrationally consume this. Not the fact that humans inherently are always done for instant gratification. You are going to be given prescription if you fulfill certain medical parameters to access this, i.e., you are prescribed by your psychologist, for example, or you have been proven to have chemical wrongdoing in your brain, right? Thus, you are required to take these drugs, manufactured drugs, to balance the abnormalities that happen in your brain chemicals, right? Government should prove why natural substances such as mushroom, for example, mushroom toxin production, for example, that is accessible for everyone is something that is good and something that you want to promote without the mechanism to control the behavior of people to always access these natural substances at the end of the day, right? But second point of contribution, let's talk about why it will create better innovations under our side of the house. Look, under our side of the house, when these chemical substances are going to be manufactured under our side of the house, it means that there is always a continuous discussion regarding about the innovation and how we are going to make it better, right? There is always discussion regarding the utilization of substances under our side of the house, because this is going to be manufactured. Therefore, continuous research and development will always exist under our side of the house, right? You are going to make sure that substances that you develop to always be safe for the people, acknowledging that these drugs can be recreational, but should be in the proper amount of doses. We do not oppose this. But by promoting these natural substances, ladies and gentlemen, without proper accessibility and so on and so forth, it is going to be dangerous for the people because they are not going to be regulated, right? As this is the production of nature, technically no one owns the nature. Thus, there is no incentive to regulate and counterbalance the accessibility towards this. If you are not given an opportunity to manufacture in the very first place, why are you bothered to regulate something that does not give you benefit, right? I think that this is the characterization of companies, researchers, and government that they always oppose, right? Everyone can access mushroom toxin production, for example, to make them fly and so on and so forth. But the continuous usage of it is very dangerous. Why is it going to be better under our the house? When you try to manufacture this, promoting people to use the manufacturer one, it means that you are giving us an agency to control the supply and demand on the market. We are counterbalancing the excessive amount of instant gratification that people always wanting to utilize this particular drugs and so on and so forth, right? We think that this is going to be better. Why is that so? Because we are able to inline the health facilities that we can provide to the people, and also can stop the supply, for example, once the recreational effect towards the human are going too massive, right? Because we are not ready, for example, to handle the handle the health facilities and so on and so forth, right? So we can control it at best, ladies and gentlemen. So this is something that is good under our server house, because allowing them to use manufacturing, giving us the agency to control the supply and demand, making it not too detrimental for the people, very proud to stand on single position.
All right, continuing, we call upon the Deputy Prime Minister. You're here.
All right, perfect. Just give me 20 seconds to start.
Hello, Ji.
Right. I'm sorry. The net was a little dodgy. Just a mic check. Am I clearly audible?
Yes, you're audible.
All right. Perfect. I'll put my own timer, but could you just give me a timestamp on 5:30 so that I'll take a PY from closing?
All right, sure.
Okay. Perfect. Right. All right. Okay. Perfect. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel realize op is out of this debate because they never make a clear distinction when they're talking about medical drugs and when they're talking about recreational drugs. Realize when it suits them, they start talking about medical drugs, and when it suits them, they talk about recreational drugs. And that is their problem, right? Realize that their entire premise of their arguments is that there is zero research in recreational drugs, natural drugs, and you just go up in the jungle and pick up and get high on anything, right? We counter that. But realize what the points they tell us. First, they tell us that, there will be accountability for the companies in kind their part. And panel realize, again, we made the distinction and dismantle their case. Realize in the medical drugs, it is symmetric, right? And because realize that in every country, there's a national medical council, and that national, unless the drug is passed by the national medical council, it cannot legally be administered in any hospital. That is to say, I cannot pick up any particular thing from the jungle and give it to the patients and say, oh, this will help you solve the problem. That is to say, at a point of time when you talk about the medical profession, this particular harm that they are actually talking about is symmetric, because in every country you have to pass adequate medical tests and adequate medical research by these national medical councils before actually going and administering it hospitals. But talking about recreational drugs, again, that is symmetric, right? Because at that point of time, realize that where is the recreational cocaine being prepared? It is not being prepared in MNCs like Apple or Google, right? It is being produced in countries in Colombia, etc., whereas there is already no accountability. That is to say, if a person dies on cocaine because he was consuming it recreation, you cannot hold the drug mafia in Colombia responsible for that, right? At point of time, we don't understand the utility of this accountability to begin with. But second, tell us that there is continuous development and research. Again, that's symmetric for medical research. That is to say, at any point, Shivan justifies this to, right? At the point of time, you're going and research in the medical field, that medical research is better, and the medical officials want to push these natural drugs because, as we tell you, there's a higher benefit because there's less industrialization, less harm to the environment while you consume these natural drugs, and therefore the research and development is even higher on our side of the paradigm, especially because this is a particular drug that has less been researched about in the very first place, right? But realize again, when you talk about recreational drugs, this harm is symmetric because at no point of time you see people in the National Medical Council researching over whether cocaine is good for people, administering on people or not. But next they tell us that there will be counterbalancing of demand and supply of drugs in their opposition paradigm. Again, asymmetric panel. When you talk about medical research, we don't believe that demand supply. I think when we talking about demand supply, they're essentially referring to recreational drugs. But realizing even recreational drugs, this counterbalancing does not happen in their paradigm. You do not see, the government does not see how much cocaine they have to give in the country and how much not. That is to say, again, that harm is symmetric, right? At that point of time, panel, all the other will be integrated rebuttals. Panel, what do they tell you? At a point of time, you go ahead and co-opt in the usage of this natural drugs instead of the manufactured drugs. We tell you when you're talking about recreation, there are two things that you have to consider. First, and this is a clear distinction that we do not want to realize, that there's a natural body autonomy. That is to say, if I'm going to go ahead and consume a drug which opposition co-opts into, I better go ahead with a natural drug that has a lesser degree of going ahead and having long-term effects on me. That is proved by research that Shivan justifies into Silicon Valley, etc. At that point, I realize when I'm consuming this natural drug, I'm getting the same amount of trip that I'll get from the cocaine, but realize that the effect and the addiction that it has on me for the long term is relatively less, right? Because these are not manufactured or industrialized. I am not a refined form of any drug. At that point, I realize that the level of harm that is causing to you is much less. But secondly, realize there's a body autonomy, which is a basic principle that is realized. At that point of time, if I'm going ahead and I want to experiment with drugs, that is my body autonomy. I can go ahead and choose these drugs instead of the manufactured drugs because the level of impact, the negative impact that this will have on me is much less to begin with. But realize next, what we tell you, there is a less harm to the environment. This we talk about both medical and recreational drugs. At a point of time, you go ahead and manufacture drugs in industries. Realize when you talk about recreational drugs, how do these industries look like? These industries look like industries in Colombia or the parts of the world where there are large fields and there is no accountability mechanism. That is to say that these are cheaply produced by people in a home shelter because it's not legal, and realize they are more often than not contaminated because you don't know what the fuck are they putting into that cocaine to begin with, right? And that is to say there's a high propensity for you to get affected by this particular grain because you do not know that what kind or what is the quality of the substance to begin with. At that point of time, realize that there's a higher propensity for you to get a greater side effects from this to begin with. But realize that the push that you're getting to consume these drugs in the natural side of it is by the environmentalists and not by drug users. At that point of time, the accountability that opposition has to it is higher on our side, right? Because now, when you're going ahead and consuming it for recreation, you cannot hold like Pablo Escobar responsible for killing you, but you can sure as fuck go ahead and say that these environmentalists were pushing for it, and they're wrong if they go ahead and do something, propose something that is wrong. At that point of time, accountability is higher on our side, but realize even the quality of these natural substances is higher on our side, because realize at a point of time you go ahead and you do not have to manufacture it in cheap, bad industries. So therefore, the propensity for someone to mix something with it or you to die with it is relatively less because you're going ahead and consuming something that is natural to begin with, and with the very propensity of it that it has been determined safe, right? That is to say, at no point of time will I go ahead and pick up anything in the jungle and like die on it, right? That is not the case. That is to say, there's a decent amount of research to tell you that all right, you can consume this drug to give you a psychotic effect. At that point of time, realize that the propensity for you to have a negative impact on you is much lesser in our cyber department. Realize that it targets research, right? Again, planning, realize at a point of time, this is the medical thing. Point of time, you're going ahead and using natural substances instead of the industrialized one, which every country will want to go ahead and co-opt into. Before that, closing review of an extension. Any questions? 3, 2, 1. All right. Now, see, realize at the point of time when a country goes ahead and pushes for the natural substances, realize there's a higher degree of research that is involved in these natural substances because obviously, because there's a lesser cost involved in co-opting into these natural substances, such as a particular substance that is naturally produced. At that point of time, realize it targets a higher amount of research than in ops by them to begin with. Right? Even when we talk about recreation, right? Realize at the point of time when we go ahead and co-opt into the opposition's narrative by saying that recreation drugs, when they tell you there'll be a counterbalance of demand and supply. Realize there is no accountability mechanisms in the I'm so sorry, it's a protected time. Realize in the opposition's paradigm, there is no accountability mechanism in place. But right now, at the point of time, if I go ahead and consume the circumstances which I realize actively being promoted by environmentalists, I have the propensity to go ahead and hold them accountable for these actions. At that point of time, realize that the accountability mechanism is harsh. The panel, what do we tell you in our speeches? Right? So realize at the point of time, first we tell you there's a bodily autonomy, and the people who want to go ahead and use the psychotic particular products, there will be a higher propensity that they have a less damaging effect on their body for consuming that. Second, realize that you'll get the same hallucinating effects, so that's a very good substitute to cocaine, etc. Third, realize the quality of it is much more safer than our side and in their side. And fourth, realize that the accountability mechanism on our side is much higher because you can call out these environmentalists to doing it. Fifth, realize this continuous development research. Realize in their side, and this is not an evolving framework. That is to say, most of the research that had to be done on manufactured products and reviews, but in natural products is no going framework. Therefore, it is evolving, and in long term, it has the propensity to harbor much higher benefits than in outside. And sixth, we tell you that there's a counterbalancing of demand supply, that this so hard is something that does not exist in their paradigms. And for those of you who believe it is very better for you to go ahead and shift to these natural substances in medical fields and in recreational fields because there's a higher accountability, because there's a better production system and there's better regulatory mechanisms. For those reasons, we're very, very proud to propose.
Am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, if you want to POI, just unmute yourself. And my gender preference is he or her. Arranging my paper first. Yes. My paper is closed. Kamu lihat nggak?
No. And then take it.
Okay. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think in this debate we should talk about whether we should choose chemical over natural substances, because opening opposition is really lack of acknowledgement that actually what if this natural substance is actually good and why it's still bad under their sort of the house. And for example, an opening government, they never tell you or involve how this kind of environmentalist role is going to be prominent in this debate. Now I'm going, as closing government, we'll taught you how we're going to actively promote the natural substances, because we are not like OG that want to regulate this kind of usage of natural substances, but we are only focusing on how we're going to educate the people of how this, for example, natural substance actually works, how it's going to be beneficial for the use of medical cure, for example. We say this kind of education goes along with collaborations with experts. The natural substances that is this environmentalists actively promote is exclusively to something that is already been laboratory tested by scientists and have been proven safe and not damaging. Of course, as an environmentalist, our interest is actually want to save the human race, for example. Therefore, the dangerous idea, for example, people is going to negligence and going to use toxic natural substances is not going to be happen anywhere, right? So we say with this corporation between environmentalists and the experts on people that is work in this kind of substances is going to tackle the dangerous things that this opening opposition always talking about. There is two things that I'll bring in my speech. First of all, why we want to actively promote this, and second of all, how the manufacturing of this natural substance is going to be better under our side of the house. First, before going to my substances, I'm going to give you 3 points to respond to the opening oppositions. First, on the point of accountable, they say that it's going to be because this kind of that people is going to recklessly going to go to toxic mushroom, for example, is the second of all, there's no one is on the forest and so on and so forth. First of all, as environmentalists, you have to consider we are people with brain, right? People, of course, as environmentalists, want to be in a good course of advocating or promote something, because if not, then your image as environmentalist is going to be harmed. That means that you're going to lessen your legitimacy to actually convince society to actually go to you, right? Second of all, when you know that when you know something is related to human race, you much more like to be more wise to actually pick and choose on what kind of things that you want to promote as with using your identity in the very first place. We say this accountability still happen under our side of the house, because the concern of environmentalists is also want to save the human race itself. Second of all, about this access, they said that, for example, if you are going to the opposition, there's prescription from psychology and so on and so forth. We say access is still happen under our side of the house, because OG already taught how this is going to be a curement, for example, meaning the curement is already going to be conduct by hospital, by pharmacy that's going to provide this kind of substances. We say this is going to be better under our side of the house. We question the accessibility under their side of the house, right? Because the chemical substances, for example, that they support, that is also really expensive to the point that it's kind of marginalized people, for example, that is also having depressions or any stress, is not going to have this kind of thing, for example, because this chemical usage, for example, in the United States of America, like opioid usage, is actually giving harm to the span of the health of people in the United States of America. So therefore, like, for example, they say about innovations, like we say the innovation under their side of the house is much more likely the one that is fast effect, for example, because that's what happened in the status quo. Because people are more like to say, I want to go with drugs that actually giving me no thank you, giving me instant effect, for example. That's the reason why much people going to chemical drugs in the status quo. That's why these environmentalists want to opt in, because this behavior is already harm the human race and also harm the environment. For example, how these chemicals production or manufacturing is actually giving pollutions to the environment. Now going to my substantive, right? Why we want to actively promote this? As an environmentalist, our interest is to go back to earth, living with all natural substances, like, for example, for medications or for our food, because they concerns also how people use this linked to medical treatment, because we already acknowledge that these chemical substances is really dangerous for our harm, and how, for example, the lifespan of human race in this earth is going to be shortened because how the behavior of people using these drugs, right? We say this kind of natural substances is proven to be beneficial, right? It's beneficial on the term of as therapy, for example. This is the initial purpose of how this, for example, the expertise in the past using natural substances is exactly for therapeutic, as this can cater to all people. That so many people use chemical drug as a cure that give, for example, long-term pain, because the effect is to what happened, for example, 10 years in their life. We say because this environmentalist is interested to because the environmental see that the chemical already destroy our nature. Of course, for example, some chemical substances giving you benefit, but this chemical already destroy our nature. Therefore, we say environmentalists want to opt in that. Why it has to be environmental? First of all, start with very basic, right? Because we say the people in marginalized area or people in the rural area also need this kind of substances, right? But they can't afford it, for example, because the hospital is limited, or for example, the chemical is not the distributions of this kind of substances is not really widely distributed. We say these people now, as we going to give a natural substances, means for example in a rural area where most of this kind of fungal, for example, is already easy to gain, is going to be beneficial for this kind of marginalized people, because they can get access to that, and saying that, for example, oh, I know that this kind of substances is going to make me is going to benefit me, I'm going to take that. We say this also environmentalists also operates to the rural area, right? Of course, we as a government, for example, we want to give the welfare to our society, meaning this kind of environmentalist is the one that is going to go. This kind of environmentalists is the one that fit in, because they operate still the rural area, because they going to assist this kind of rural area concerns about the preservations of their nature. This is going to be beneficial at the end of the day, right? Because now this kind of people, they get educated and they much more likely to actually have the counter narrative. They say, oh, I don't have to go to chemical substances in order for me to be safe, but I can go to the natural substances that is much more likely to beneficial for me in the long term. How is going to affect the manufacturing? Because we say the manufacturing status quo is dominated by chemical procurement. Why this is bad? Because the long-term harm that affect the span of our health. It's also, we say, this manufacturing and under the house is going to be changed, because now people are getting more educated, and it's going to change their behavior and preference on how they're going to choose chemical substances over natural substances. It's going to make this kind of people of seller or people that's going to create medicine is going to go to the natural substances, and also going to attract researchers to cover any more experiments to produce human to natural resources. We are very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we call upon the member of opposition. Feel free to start your speech.
Test, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wait. POI through the chat, please. Starting my time.
Prioritizing.
Can CG mute themselves? Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, we think that the focus on this debate is why, as environmentalists, you need and urgently needed this promoting to be that active. What is your purpose to do so, right? So here's framing from closing opposition. Right. Number one, we say that there is two reasons why people want to take their human consciousness, for example. Number one is medical treatment. Of course, they want to surgery, for example. And second, they want to do that willingly, for example, using the drugs. This is as an option. For example, they are doing depressed or even stressed. We think that's why people want to take away their consciousness, right? So here's the context. But before that, let's frame other benches, right? Opening government cannot win this debate, because basically opening government is a drug dealer, I see, because more into their argument is focusing on the legalization of these drugs without necessarily explaining why then it is the more concern of the environmentalists in itself, right? And second, closing government. Closing government comes to the idea of like, yeah, nowadays people misuse drugs. This is the people who are stressed now easily opt into the idea of drugs. But exactly, you justify that in your case, because now then you promoting the idea of natural resources that later on becoming some kind of option for them to also take away their consciousness. But the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna explain to you later why then this is still bad in the end of the day. But second of all, closing government also come with the idea that rural area cannot get any medical treatment, so that's why this fungal or even natural resources will be beneficial for them in the future. But the problem is, if you cannot get this kind of chemical treatment, for example, we think that the idea of this fungal or even these natural resources later on will also being distributed and also becoming like this chemical or even injection that can take away your consciousness. So in the end of the day, the problem about distribution is also happen in government side of the house, right? But before that, let's contextualize first. Here's the idea of actively promoting, right? Actively promoting, making your natural resources is becoming the main agenda. Later on, there will be the normalization, right? You encourage people to use this kind of natural resources and also becoming your main agenda. The problem in this, in closing opposition, is that we say that how society react to that is that society will want to take the option of natural resources in itself, right, ladies and gentlemen, and they will use this in itself. And society will push you to make an experiment, for example, to create a prescription, for example, to this kind of natural resources later on. You're gonna need to take this fungal, for example, to the lab, or even this mushroom, for example, or even this leaf, for example, and now you gonna give a prescription or whatever it is. This is why we different with opening opposition, because look, opening opposition only focusing on the idea that there is no prescription, there is no doctor that will give you the doses or whatsoever. But we're gonna deal with the best scenario in all government team, that even if in the future you're gonna have the prescription or even you're gonna have the guidance how to use this mushroom, for example, to take away the consciousness, we say that's still bad toward the idea of an environment in itself, ladies and gentlemen. So here's the thing, right? We say this is also our main contribution. Let's talk about why then we cannot do these natural resources becoming so viral and becoming the main agenda as environmentalists. There is two things. Number one, about the purity, ladies and gentlemen. Nowadays, the idea of earth is somehow being consumed so much by human, and also they also being contaminated, for example, by carbon or even plastic that you use, right? We say that the purity for this fungal, for example, or even the mushroom in itself is not that pure anymore comparatively 2,000 years before to use that as the medical treatment. Because you need to understand that the moment people willingly want to take away their consciousness, the moment they want to do through surgery, for example, into medical health. We think that we want to more focus on the medical health in itself, ladies and gentlemen. So we say when the moment your purity is being questioned, that's the moment you're gonna take them to lab. That's the moment you want to take away the poison from this mushroom, for example. That's the moment chemical is also will be input to them. The contamination argument from opening government cannot stand, because in the end of the day, your natural resources will be also intertwined with some chemical to make them stay longer, for example, to can be distributed to Papua, for example. So the idea of this is that our second contribution about the exploitation. Yes, or mainly briefly told you about exploitation, but they never even explain to you what kind of exploitation. We say, ladies and gentlemen, by my context, the moment these natural resources or even your mushroom or even leaf becoming the main source of this consciousness takeaway, ladies and gentlemen, that's the moment a company, medical business take this as a lucrative agenda, ladies and gentlemen. That's the moment they're gonna take a look where these plants comes in, where this mushroom comes in. There is a plant, for example, that very endemic or even rare or even need long periodic time to bloom, for example, they're gonna take away that and make them as a medical treatment, ladies and gentlemen, because you have the option for people to demand you not use injection, for example, to take away consciousness when you want to surgery, but then they want to these natural resources. That's the moment medical business comes in, ladies and gentlemen. That's the moment your mushroom in your rural area, for example, becoming exploitative. That's the moment they want to make this as a business. But the problem is medical use is very expensive, ladies and gentlemen. This is the moment they can do the pricing. That's the moment medical use cannot be accessible anymore. That's the moment your environment is now becoming more exploitative in a way, or the medical users will use your natural resources and they will take away all the mushroom that you protect in the end of the day. So as environmentalists in the health care, you cannot get that. It will be more complex. And second of all, your environment will be more likely to expose and also endangered and being exploitative. We more than proud to oppose.
All right. Continuing on, we call upon the government whip to close the case for team government.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so if you have preference through chat, I hope OO will engage to me. Gender pronouns, she or her. And yeah, I will arrange my paper first and also make my timer. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, you cannot credit more to the opening half since they are busy talking about which one is better, natural substances or unnatural substances, and directly jump to how it's going to give effect to someone that use it. Hence, they were talking about access, forgetting why environmentalists should or shouldn't do this, why it's going to fulfill the interest of environmentalists, and how it's going to change or shift all of the chemical drugs, for example, to the natural substances in the end of the day, right? And then closing oppositions coming to us that by basically they're saying that by exactly the same with their oppositions, but there is what makes their different. It's just they also neglect. They never, the difference between them is they never engage to my first speaker to begin with, right? I think like I'm going to make this debate easy by reviewing all of the argument coming from the opposition benches and also the difference between opening government and also closing government, right? I think like I'm going to go to the closing opposition first. I think like closing oppositions talking about they already neglect the fact that my first speaker already told you that we are doing collaboration with the medical and also pharmacy and so on and so forth. They're saying that it's my first speaker already proved to you that it's when the moment we already doing the collaborations, meaning what will happen in the closing opposition about surgery and so on and so forth, we will save everything. We will make this kind of, we will save everything that using the chemical to the natural to make the surgery, for example, because this is also my first speaker already told you, but the interest of environment, which is we want everything the chemical shift to the natural, because this is the interest of them. This is the reason why, for example, these environmentalists already making a campaign that you need to be a vegetarian, for example, you need to stop consume beef, for example. It's because they care a lot about the about something that go back to the earth. Like I think like the interest of the environmentalists about the conscientious about the recreation of human, it's because there's a lot of people that using this kind of thing regardless the willingness of and also the medical urgency. We see that these environmentalists see a potential that we can use something from earth, for example, to minimize the chemical uses in the end of the day. So that's the reason why these environmentalists jump in and also will jump into this kind of thing in the first place, right? I think like more rebuttal to the closing opposition will be integrated to my rebuttal to the opening oppositions, right? I think like going to the opening oppositions. I think opening opposition is really assumptive in their argument so that I will have so many clarifications and also engagement towards opening oppositions. Number one, they're saying about safety, right? They're saying that chemical is more safety because, more credible because it's true laboratory test and the agency coming from the therapist, doctor, and so on and so forth, like, and natural substances. Several respond to this. Number one, I think it's really assumptive, clear, because it's already clearly clarified by my first speaker how we will mechanize it, right? How we will actually educate people and how we actually encourage this therapist or this doctor to shift these chemical substances to the natural substances, for example, right? So it's already tackled all of the argument coming from about this kind of safety, right? And then they're talking about exploitations, how people will always seeking for happiness, for example, meaning people will looking for it and also will exploit it, right? Hence, on how environmental changes that it's going to be it's not going to be fulfill the demand and so on and so forth. Yeah, but before that, opening positions.
Okay, so girl, I already gave a 3-minute POI explaining a rebuttal explaining to you how that these nature are very dynamic and not controllable. How can you ensure the security?
I'm going to talk after this actually. And they talk there is possible changes and it's uncontrollable, right? In their speech, I feel like it's going to be controlled under a Sabdahas because meaning when the moment environmentalists already doing the collaboration, meaning that so many researchers will actually looking for it, right? For example, what is actually more potential coming from nature that we actually can use, for example, for this psychedelics and so on and so forth. Maybe there's something that researcher will find out that there's the other mushroom, for example, there's the other fungi, for example, meaning that in our side. And also will be rebut the innovation under your the house because in our side innovation will be there because these researchers of course will find out what kind of natural substances that actually we can use. For example, when the moment this kind of things is already when the moment there is a demand coming from the society, and I feel like this debate is not talking about how when the moment we implement this, that doesn't mean that all people suddenly will use psychedelic, right? It is because let's see what happens under status quo. Even if there is a chemical drugs and also natural substances, there is still some people that want to use it or don't want to use it, right? We just want to give them we just want to make these people that use this kind of this kind of consciousness, for example, to actually change and shift it to the natural substances because how the chemical is already damaged the environment, for example, and how it's actually we have something better for you in the end of the day. So exploitation is not going to be happens because how this environmentalist is actually can monitor this kind of usage, for example. This also the reason why environmentalists want to opt in to this kind of discussions because these environmentalists want to make sure that everyone go back to the earth, but in the first place in the same time they also want to make sure that people will not going to be exploit this kind of natural substances, and that's the reason why environmentalist has this kind of thing, has this kind of interest in the end of the day. Right now, going to OG, I think like we are already make a clear differences between us and OG because in OG they're busy want to regulate it, but they never actually told us how they were going to regulate and mechanize it and how they can suddenly educate people in the first place. What you get in closing government is that the fact that the interest of environmentalists that want to encourage people go back to the earth and care about their earth is fulfilled because we already cater people and also business that actually they actually use this kind of consciences for their own purpose, for example, right? And second of all, I think it will help change the perspective coming from the society, and also how the researchers will also looking how to actually create more beneficial thing, for example, beneficial thing for consensus, for example, and also how they don't need to use chemical substances that actually can damage the earth, for example. Instead, you can use these natural substances in the first place. And it's safetier, for example, because we will do the education and collaboration which actively promote this, meaning that people will shift the unnatural substances to the natural substances. We're really proud to propose. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for that speech. And now for the final speech of this debate, we call upon the opposition whip.
Okay, check. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Right, thank you. Okay, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. In response to the closing government, I think that closing opposition is going to be clear in 2 things. One, I think that the stance of closing government is that they want to shift or change the mindset of people to go to the natural resources and remember what Earth has provided to human instead of using chemical compound because of the reasons of damaging, right? I think that it also in line with the opening government saying that, no, this is going to make an addiction for people. That's why like it is bad, right? Here's the thing. First response, I think that, look, if you want to say that the contributions of the environment and the environmentalists in the current condition, it's just simply because you want to put the interest not in the medical treatment and the human consciousness. We've been, for example, like taking the consciousness of people to take care of the environment, for example, because they are living besides the trash and they know that, and also they are aware of any, pollutions that appear. I think that the reasons why like they keep protecting the nature is still there, right? This is not the interest of the human consciousness based on the medical treatment or even the sense of damaging and a sense to human, right? I think that in all cases that the environment damages will eventually damage the human, but I think that this is going to be a different case when it comes to the treatment of the consciousness. 2, I think that what makes it very important is that I would like to emphasize the ideas of innovation that the closing government try to promote. I think that they want to avoid chemical compound for the reasons that they want to remember the Earth. And I think that this is safer. Look, I think that there is no such a thing as a drugs that save the human, right? I think that the probability for you to cure from the current illness you have is just 50-50. Nobody knows, right? So what we can do is just to give the provisions for them, right? And also to give them a consideration for that. I think that the innovation we try to promote in the medical business that my member has told you is that the synthetic drugs that becomes, for example, the further research. That's why like we don't want to exploit natural resources more, right? This is the reasons why like vaccine or whatever it is, right? It is coming from the natural resources first, then we're going to move to the synthetic one or the chemical one. I think that this is the innovation that all the government benches try to forget, right? So move on to the direct responses before I go to my exclusive contributions. The first one, I think that the ideas of affordability that is not integrated, right? I think that the affordability of nature, they say that this is, cheap and this is affordable for everyone, is accessible and stuff. I think that firstly, I think that in the current context, you have incentive from the government, right? We know that there are so many incentive help, like Indonesia, you have BPJS, if like you still pay for that, I think that is still affordable. I think that there are so many mechanisms in other countries to do so. 2, even if they don't, I think that this is harmful. In times of emergency, I think that in sick condition, you are shifted to personal interest eventually, right? You're not going to focus on the environment preservation like they assume. I think that this is the thing that they need to consider, because promoting this, it means that you're going to shift the people minds to care and to prioritize, for example, the decisions about environment. What we don't care here is that, right? Because the ideas of human survival is more important in this case, I think that environment preservation will be left behind eventually, right? Thirdly, I think that in terms of pricing, like they talk about, even if it is still high, I think that it is contingent to the rareness of the raw materials. Probably it is going to be very cheap at first, but eventually it's going to be really expensive, right? Because you will exploit more rare more rare plants or whatever it is, right? So I'm going to accept in POI in 530. 2 contributions, framing, right, to strengthen my members, right? The first one is the ideal of environmentalists, and 2 is the people consciousness, why this is very important. I think that the people consciousness, unlike the opening opposition talks about recreations and stuff, I think that they just may fly and whatever it is. I think that in the medical treatment and medical business is the most important, right? When it comes to surgery, when it comes to emergency situation that we talk about. Why the natural is not lucrative to respond this case? three things. One, it is not always provided and adequate. Maybe, for example, like opening opposition may say about the geographical stuff that may change or whatever it is. I think that we're talking about the exploitations by the environmentalists. But it means that you're going to show to people that this is possible for you to exploit, right? This is the option for you to take. That's why you can survive by this. I think that the options that environmentalists try to promote is very, very harmful for this environment, right? I think that we don't want that to happen. Two, I think that it will exploit nature more massively because eventually, as an impact, you will have deforestation, environmental gradation, and stuff, right? This is what we call, instead of you have that natural changes by opening opposition, I think that this is the human involvement that happens a lot when you come to the promotions, right? Three, even if, like, for example, addiction occurs in this sense, like opening government says, I think that this is normal. I think in every single demand of society, when you are matched with this, more importantly to the environment, I think that you're going to be addicted to that more, right? It's 5:30. OG, yes.
Right. On our side of OG, recreational, talking about recreational drug, there's an accountability in terms of you going in and holding these environmentalists accountable if they actively promote a recreational drug which causes harm. There's zero accountability in your side of the house because you cannot hold a drug mafia accountable. Please engage because O did not.
No, I think that the accountability in our side of the house is still there because, look, in our side, we're not going to promote it actively, but we're going to have it partially. Like, for example, like we just normally like, oh, this is the sense of the probability, but you're still keeping that, right? We don't want to make it as a source or the main target of people to do that. But two, I'm going to talk about the environmentalist capability of, misuse, right? Exploitations, like what they talk about. We're talking about medicines, right? Why the medical business is very harmful in this case? Because it is a continuous action done by the hospital and all the medical workers. Why? Like virus, because it is changing and done mutations all the time. I think that there is a high demand to exploit, right? We think that by this, you will consume more and more from natural resources that you cannot even stop eventually. The nature of the role of the nature is that this is just only a stepping stone for you to make a synthetic one. And this is going to be a good one. This is the innovation we promote in the medical business we talk about. This is not bad, but a good way to give, for example, options and pressure, for example, to the medical worker instead of, for example, the recreations that probably people do not make it as a lucrative action because you can do recreations in many ways. But medical will continuously consume your resources all the time. So proud to oppose. Thank you.